Hi, I'm Deb. I lost my daughter in December 2015 when she was 21. This is her story, but as you know, all of the folks that have died have a story. And I'm going to just play a video as I talk, and these are all children and loved ones from a group I belong to called Mums Stop the Harm that have passed away, most of them in the past 3 years. So I'm just gonna play hopefully, play this, and it should just go on its own. We'll see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My daughter's gonna be the first face you see. That's her. Just make sure, oh yeah, there they go. A few months after Ola died, I started to work for change, and really the more I found out, the more frustrated and angry I became. It's such a terrible loss, all these folks who have died. And that's when I started to work for advocacy in the advocacy area. One of the committees I'm on is the Family Engagement Committee at the BC Centre for Substance Use. And when they were contacted about having a member from there come to Boost, I volunteered right away. I hadn't even been aware there was such a group. And systemic barriers to getting Suboxone were a large part of my daughter's death. So, I mean, I know you know the barriers, but I'll point out some as I go along and tell her story. Whenever changes happen in the past 3 years, I use this little litmus test. I always say, could Ola have survived if she was still alive and still addicted? And even today, 3 years later, the answer is only a cautious maybe. I work with another group, Mums Stop the Harm, and I know from the intake that I do with new members that lots of challenges still remain. Stories like the one Cole told us earlier still abound, unfortunately. So here's Ola's story, and I'm going to talk mostly about the last year of her life, but I'll give you a bit of backstory. Ola was adopted at 3 from Russia, diagnosed at an early age with ADHD, and there was always a question of her birth mom's use of alcohol, but we could never confirm that. And from the beginning, this gal was a force of life. She was lively, funny, friendly, loving, determined, game for anything kind of gal. She had a happy childhood. And when she was 6, and she was telling me about yet another activity she wanted to join, I said, okay, but what is it that you really want to do, because we can't do them all? And she burst out, girl hockey, Mummy. We're not hockey buffs at all, my husband and I, so we didn't have any idea where that came from, but girl hockey it was, and she played that throughout her life almost. She was also a dancer. She loved to ride horses. She achieved a black belt in a martial art. She was a high-ranking cadet officer. She could play the sax and the bagpipes, 2 of the loudest instruments you'll ever want to hear. She loved being a goalie, and she was also a hockey ref. Even while struggling with addiction, she managed to graduate with a BC dogwood, but sadly, addiction impacted and took away all of the activities that she loved. Oh, Ola my Ola, she had so many indicators that made her terribly at risk of addiction: early childhood trauma, evidence that both parents struggled with alcohol, and like many of our Mums Stop the Harm kids, she exhibited early soft neurological challenges like ADHD, learning disabilities. And then if that wasn't enough, at 13 a mental illness kicked in. We were somewhat prepared for it, but she received treatment and medication and counseling throughout her short life. Like most people, the story of Ola's addiction is full of twists and turns that go through hope and horror. At some point when she was 15, and unbeknownst to us, a 50-year-old man approached her at a bus loop. Ola had poor social judgment and tended to think that anyone that was nice was okay. Obviously, this guy was not okay due to his age, but he was also a heroin and meth addict, and he lived with his brother, who was also a heroin and meth addict. And it's a long story, but the end result is that through her association with them, she became very addicted. So there's one system failure, that there's no protection for vulnerable girls and maybe boys over the age of 16. And another major system fail is, I think, early intervention would have really been helpful in her case, but there just wasn't much there. So here's the part that involves Suboxone and methadone. In the fall of 2014, Ola went to several different programs to try to get on methadone. At the first center, she went to many meetings, but it didn't result in anything. Then she went on to into another program, and as the worker accompanied her cheerfully down the stairs, she said cheerfully to her, "Now don't forget, we can't do this overnight. It could be up to 2 weeks." And I thought, 2 weeks? And sure enough, within 2 weeks, she was gone, called in again by the lure of addiction. For the most part, I was left out of the loop at both these two sites. And I think that's another fail when you can't engage the support team. We were one of her major supporters throughout her life. And the other one is limited access and slow access. So some of these things you'll hear have changed, but this is her story. So I knew a lot about Ola. She had some challenges, and I had the reports to back those up. But they weren't heard. In January of 2015, Ola started to purchase methadone on her own from her friends upstairs. I asked her if the methadone bottle was sealed when she got it, and she said no. So I suspected that she was receiving some diluted kind of something. In January, she also fell, injured her leg, and it didn't get better. Eventually, after a blood test, she was told that she had a serious blood infection common to those who use IV drugs. You might know of it. She needed surgery on her leg, and also a PICC line was inserted for heavy-duty antibiotics. And through this, she received liquid Dilaudid for the pain. The hospital addiction team was called in, and at their suggestion, the liquid form was changed to the pill form. But here's how powerful addiction is. I had warned the nurses that they should move the IV pole thingy because Ola had this amazing savant-like quality to see something once, some machine once, and she knew how it worked. However, they didn't move it, and I would arrive, and there would be Ola flushing her line, and I'm saying, "Are you supposed to be doing that?" "No, but it's okay." And about a couple days later, I got a call from Ola saying, "My PICC line blew up." She said, and they had to remove it. So when I get to the hospital that day, an ortho doc met me with a very disapproving look and told me that Ola must have gone out and purchased drugs off the street, and that's what blew up the PICC line. So he leaves, and I say to her, "What happened?" She tells me that she saved one of her dillies, crushed it, diluted it in the water, shook it up, and shot it into her IV, and that's what blew up her PICC line. So such is the intensity and the pull of addiction that when she was on the liquid form, she recognized it and she wanted it back. So she tried to make her own. And there's another barrier, the doctor's assumption that since she was a drug addict, she'd gone to the street to get what she needed. She hadn't. She got it right there in the hospital. And also the stigma of being addicted and the disapproving look and no questions asked. After 2 weeks, Ola was set up to be discharged with a home IV program. However, when she stood up to put on her pants, she collapsed in excruciating pain. Her femur had broken. So effective was this pathogen that it dissolved her bone. So into surgery again, where an external frame with 4 large spikes was inserted through her skin, and then a week later, another surgery to insert an internal frame. She spent a total of 5 weeks in the hospital, all due to drug use. And it's a really strange position to be in as a parent, to be worried about your daughter, your formerly athletic daughter, whose leg is, now not in good shape. But on the other hand, I knew where she was and she was safe. It's kind of a weird position to be in. I asked her at one point during her hospital stay if her experiences had convinced her that she'd had enough of drugs, and she said yes. But to my sister, she admitted she was really worried she was going to relapse. Before she was released, a hospital addiction doc came in and talked to me. It was the first time that they'd consulted me, and she talked to us about Suboxone, and Ola was given a 2-week supply, which we, her parents, were to manage, which made sense if you knew Ola. She was still very ill and didn't have, but the results of the Suboxone were kind of amazing. She didn't have any drug-seeking behaviors, and so we were told to go back to a community addiction program to carry on the Suboxone, and we mistakenly assumed that that meant we'd be still allowed as her parents to manage her Suboxone. But on the 7th week of getting carries, which we managed, she walked into the office with a cane instead of crutches, and the doc there wrote a prescription, only this time with no warning. DWI, daily witness ingestion, was required. We were all surprised, but he's the doctor, and we needed him to write the prescriptions, and to get another doctor would take weeks. And there's another system fail, I think, is that it was more about what the system needed, what he thought he'd be safe with, rather than what she needed. rather than taking into consideration what this individual needed. She didn't do well, as you'll see. So I took her for her first DWI at the pharmacy in plain view of the other shoppers. She was given her pills, a little bit of water, and she took them in front of the pharmacist and then was asked to open her mouth to show that the pills were gone. But I recognized her body language and I thought, I tried to make light of it and say, well, I was pretty fast. But Ola looked at me and said, I might see someone I know. She was deeply ashamed of her situation. Becoming addicted had surprised her, as it did many. She cried over it, and she told me she didn't know how it had gotten this far. So there's really a lot of shame for some individuals. Ola lived with her boyfriend part of the time, and he was a big support for her. We would have preferred she lived at home, but she was 20. And neither he nor we could persuade her to go back to the pharmacy. She said she could do it on her own. Suboxone worked for her and cut her cravings, and now she thought she was okay. And she said, it's like a taper, she told me. Oh, you know how well tapers work. So there's a lot of barriers there. She just wasn't okay. Nobody called her, nobody checked in to see where she was or why she didn't go to pick up her next appointment. That summer, she experienced 3 overdoses, which we found out always after the fact. And every time she was released, the same day from the same emergency room, no follow-up, no report to her primary care doc, and no Suboxone, which would have been on the screen. I don't know if they could prescribe it at the time. So there's another barrier, lost opportunity. She was at her most vulnerable, and I think would have gone on to take some Suboxone. So finally, she agrees to go back to the addiction doctor. And she says, but I really want you to help me get caries. I really wanted caries too, because that's what had worked. So I said, well, can I go in and talk to the doctor about some of your, some of the things you're dealing with, and take your Sunny Hill report, complex behaviors unit, and explain it to him. So she said, sure, and I had her sign a consent form. So I take the report, I go in to see the doc, and he says he needed to see her sign the consent form and therefore would not talk to me about her case. However, I'm a counselor, and I knew that I could talk to him. I could give him information, which he did listen to. And then he said, no problem. He would give her caries. So I thought he got it. And I thought he understood that with Ola's challenges, she would need support throughout. I thought he understood that she was at high risk because she'd had 3 overdoses. But I really overestimated his capacity to deal with her. So, I found out later that he never consulted with her longtime psychiatrist, and he certainly didn't encourage the team approach. So the next appointment we could get was 12 days later. That's a long time for someone who's overdosed 3 times. And when we went in, the doctor was short and curt. Ola was given her prescription all right, and when we went to fill it, we'd received caries all right, but this time we, her parents, had to pick them up every day. I'm not sure what the point of that was, but that's what we had to do. Now, for those of you who've never had to do DWI, let me tell you what I learned. It's not that easy. You have to be pretty organized. You're tied to the same pharmacy. It's easier if you have a vehicle, but I thought to myself, no wonder people screw up. It's not, it's not really all that easy unless you live right beside the pharmacy. Anyway, we did this for 3 weeks, and then again with no notice, the doctor required DWI. Now it gets really strange. I phoned the clinic, and the nurse told us, come in for a family meeting. So we went in. The doctor says, why are you here? I started to talk about Suboxone caries. He cut me off and said, DWI was now part of the treatment. I said, isn't the point to have a person take Suboxone? Caries worked. DWI didn't. He said that if Ola could take the bus to her boyfriend, she could go to the drugstore. Another barrier, an assumption. I said, well, actually, we drive her. He drives her. She doesn't take the bus because of her leg. And Ola herself pointed out, I do better with my parents' help. But he wouldn't budge. And in desperation and annoyance, I actually said to him, she's overdosed 3 times. I'm just trying to keep my kid alive here. No exaggeration. He looked at me and did this. Yeah. I couldn't stay in the room after that, but I couldn't understand his attitude either. This was Suboxone. It's not methadone. It had been successful for her. She'd recently talked about the future. And this is what I had seen. This is my rubric. On Suboxone, no overdoses. Off Suboxone, overdoses. But yeah, so anyway, when we left, Ola had the prescription, and I said, come with me to a different clinic. We'll see if we can get somebody to work with us. And she said in her usual independent way, no, Mom, I think I can do this. And off she trotted to her boyfriend's. I later found that prescription amongst her belongings, never filled. On December 22nd, Ola went Christmas shopping and never came home. She didn't answer the phone, and we all frantically searched. On December 23rd, we reported her missing. We heard about the 4 people who had overdosed that previous day, but the descriptions didn't match her. But on the 24th of December, 2 young cops walked up my door to tell us that Ola was deceased. And that was how it came to be that my husband and I were at the morgue on Christmas Eve. The shock and pain of holding your child's cold, lifeless hand is kind of beyond description, and it's just forever etched on my mind. Days later, with the help of the police, we pieced together the story. Video footage showed us that Ola had met someone that none of us knew, and together they purchased some drugs, went into an SRO stairwell to use, and at some point, the person she was with left her either in death or distress and took her phone, her ID, her backpack, and her Christmas shopping. There was a Narcan kit 2 floors down, but no one knew she was there, nobody but him. She was discovered the next morning by a staff member, and they hadn't been able to identify her until I called in. I can't tell you in words what it's like to lose a child for all of us who've lost a child up on that screen, and I hope that none of you know now, and I hope you never know. I often think of the collective grief of other parents and children and partners who have lost loved ones through this crisis. It's incredibly sad, and sometimes we've wondered if those who use drugs are considered to be children of some lesser God, not so worthy of saving. The stigma of addiction and drug use still rules. So my daughter's death launched me into advocacy for change, and it's a bit of a legacy for our kids. So I want you to know that if my group, Mom Stop the Harm, can further the efforts of this collaborative, we're on board to help you in any way. We are sad, cranky, determined, fearless, warrior mums and dads and partners. Our loved ones don't cross our minds, they live in them. We've been kicked into a place no one really wants to be, and we're just going to continue to fight for those who can't, and to keep people alive. And I just want to end with, I want to thank you all for the work that you do here, and just for the light that you shine and will be shining into the dark and gnarly world of addiction. It's so much appreciated by the families. Thank you.